know. You just had way too much time on your hands. No, I think they didn't have
No, they didn't. Yep. And they really just used. Oh my gosh, fussy cut.
Yes.
Woo!
That's one.
That is spectacular. Okay, whoops, that's good.
Oh, they're just so gorgeous. Do they all have yellow centers? No.
They do.
No? Yeah, I guess
Yep, the centers are yellow, and then they have different colors, solids
so
on the
then you
next
would put
row.
yellow.
Yeah.
But isn't that common? My daughter and I were having a discussion the other day about log cabin quilts.
Mhm.
And I said, traditionally, they either have a yellow center or a red center. Isn't that usually the tradition?
It's gold, yellow,
Right,
red.
for the-
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
for
chimney.
warmth of
Yeah.
fire.
She was saying, but I
Mhm.
don't like that. She said, I was thinking blue.
Oh, current quilting is whatever you want to
But
do.
see, I just think of
I mean, when you think about it, that block was designed way back when
Well, and
they
there
didn't
was
have
only
electric
red
and gas heat and forced air.
well,
And
and wasn't it for the yellow log cabin? The yellow was for like
the fire.
The fire.
No, the fire and the hearth. That's why log cabin. You have a central hearth, and then the log cabins go around.
If you do like a blue, I look at that and all I can think of is if you have to make sure then to make the logs not be too close to that same color, they would just all kind of
It doesn't matter.
together.
No,
You're
there's
not
actually
supporting me.
no. There's really I've seen log cabins that have like all the same fabric. I'm not fabric, but yes, I have even the same fabric. And because it's cut, you can see this linear thing going on,
Sure.
but it's very subtle. I've seen log cabins where each quadrant is the same fabric even. And so it's courthouse steps and you see the zigzag as they go out.
Right.
And it's more like an hourglass triangular construction with 1, 2, 3, and 4 triangles, but it's made log cabin style.
So imagine it would like with a print, even though you cut each one, so it's a different part of that print. You know,
I wouldn't even take that time.
Oh, really?
No, just cut. And because as you even if you have the two fabrics right next to each other where the print is even right lined up, you're taking a 1/4 inch seam, so it's going to be a 1/2 inch out, and it won't be like you can
steps, like if you're doing courthouse steps.
Oh yeah. So I don't that personally, every time I see a quilt like that, I think, well, that's a lot of effort for no effect. But it isn't no effect. It's just very subtle.
Right.
And then taken much up, you'd have similar blues or similar greens, similar whatever. If you think about the not even the tradition of the block, but just simply good color balance.
Right.
If you have all blue greens, yeah, it'd be nice to have an orange or a pink or maybe a salmony pink or a purple even as that center.
Right.
But it also depends how big it is.
Right.
Because if it's a big square that they come off of, then that's going to change things. So there just aren't rules, and that's liberated quilting. Welcome to it.
If you have like a blue or something.
Hello, welcome.
You have to have that really contrasting just to make the quilt kind of, if they're all the same color.
It doesn't have to. It'll just have a different effect.
Right.
There's one log cabin style that is alternating very distinctly lights and dark contrast.
Right.
And it's constructed absolutely log cabin. So if you look how they fit together, it goes around. But if you glance at it, it looks like concentric squares.
Oh, sure.
So a light square, a dark square, a light square, a dark square, and they go all the way frame around each other. And there's another one where I make each quadrant, you alternate the light dark in an opposite way. So a light comes into a dark, and a dark comes into a light. So yeah, so there's, I mean, you can go severe contrast, you can go all, very uniform. It just gives a whole different look.
Yeah.
And it's just color and art. You can look at something like the local fellow, and I can't think of his name now. Is it shoot. There's this local fellow who paints, and his work is really misty, and all the colors are muted. Just look at the color in the painting and squint your eyes. It kind of is flowing, same color family neutrals. It's beautiful. It's peaceful, and it is in fact what that looks like on those misty, foggy mornings.
Well, when you look at nature.
Then go out to the desert in a bloom, and you've got dusty, sandy colors, and you've got vibrant reds and pinks and oranges. Yeah, and so, it's all gorgeous. Yeah, so we all choose.
You want to go home and grab all kinds of similar fabrics and lay them side by side to see what it, not ones that
well, let's have a seat and talk color. Let's do our thing. Welcome, everyone. We have a couple new faces, so I'll just do a quick introduction. And I don't know, for folks online watching, I do want to welcome the folks online watching. If, as we're talking today, I've left a little room to adjust if I need to. We've reached a point on, okay, we've talked about the borders, we've talked about quilting, and now backs and binding. So today I'm going to talk about backs and binding, and I'm also going to pull in a little on labels, hanging a quilt, so doing a sleeve pockets that help you hang a quilt, and a couple different kinds of bindings. So if there's something that you need and want, those of you who are here, just say, hey, would you also include this today? Or if you want in the chats as you're watching online, just share what you need and we'll try and include it today. So just typical bindings, hand sewn bindings, and if we don't have time today to do it, I'll just make sure to keep that in our list of things for next month. So welcome to Liberated. And before we started, we were having the conversations on the should of English paper piecing. We have a collection of some antique, very tiny hexagon English paper piecing flower, grandmother's garden, I think it's called. But just the flowers, and now what do? You have a bag full of old, beautifully made, hand sewn pieces. If you want to just hold that up, look, and it's too beautiful to not share with everybody. Look at those, don't they just make your heart happy? A bag. Too bad it's not currency or something, Just, it is in a way. It is in a way. Yeah. So, and then talking about log cabin and what's the right way. And I hope with Liberated Quilting, if you get anything from watching or being here today, it's that I hope to free your spirit for quilting, so that when you quilt, the bottom line is your enjoyment. We don't need anybody else giving us the shoulds of life, and that's not right. And so quilting is art. There is a craft, a skill to it, but there is an art form in choosing. And your brain, your DNA leads you to certain interests and attractive things. You're just drawn to certain things. And then your life experiences, your environment also forms your learning and seeing about, what's pleasant, what isn't pleasant, what isn't exciting. Some people tend to go to more vibrant, wild colors, and some people tend to go to more neutral, soft tones. That's not right and wrong. It's what pleases you. And doing it for someone else, we have a little overlay there of shoulds because you're going to want to please that other person if you know where it's going. But I also want to encourage you to just make quilts. Just make them. You don't have to have a purpose. You just enjoy the sewing, enjoy the experience of playing with design, with blocks, with color. And instead of thinking of tearing something out, if you have enough fabric, just set those blocks aside and keep going with another mint if you want. If you don't have enough fabric, then think of taking it apart more as an opportunity to reconstruct to your liking, not to someone saying that's wrong. And so I love quilting, and I often hear people saying, well, if I give this to my so-and-sos, I hope they don't let them on it. And honestly, after I've made it and bound it, I'm done with my fun. Well, not done, because the moment I hand it over to someone, that's a real joyful thing too. And of course, getting pictures of the baby on the quilt, that's lovely. Makes me happy, happy, happy. However, the making of the quilt is so joyful for me. I inspire that search for you guys.
And sometimes the baby is the dog.
That's right. That's right. And I have seen it on the quilt and gone, okay, take a deep breath and look at that. They're happy. They're happy. They're using it. You know what's the hardest thing? It's hearing the afraid to use a quilt I made and kept it folded in a cupboard. And that's, oh, please no.
The one quilt I have finished was for my just a laptop or quilt for my grandson, and it's all flannel. And his cat kind of took it over, and it makes me feel so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. He loves that cat.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. I'm going to start with this quilt. I think I've brought this in before. It looks familiar. It probably is. But I want to point out some things that happened in this quilt. First of all, this fabric, is that visible on the camera, or should I hold it up? Is that better? This fabric in the big triangle in the border. This green, and it actually has, if it's visible to you folks, a purple pine cone and a little bit of brown something, just like pine needles, I guess, sort of tossed in there. And it's all printed like almost like a lino print kind of method. It's not, but it looks like that. This is actually a batik, and then this is a tree. And those fabrics, truly, this is one I got on a total whim. I don't know what appealed to me, except I am a little neurodivergent, and it reminds me of dendrites. And so I called it my dendrite fabric all the time. And then the pine cones just sort of said, oh, use me. And then the batik. So what happened is when the pine cone fabric came in, the dendrites are 3 colors. They're winey purple and cream that's sort of two-tone, and and just a natural leaf green. And this has 2 shades of green, the print on the lighter background, and then the purpley dendrite wine color is in the pine cones. And then this golden brown that came in appealed to me to bring that green, red, yellow, true primary colors, but just kind of have a little balance on the color wheel a little bit. And the batik, as you might see in this very center section, has a golden, really yucky green color. It's just the ugliest green, but it's it's the best quilting color. It just pulls so many things together. And then it has this nice lighter green that's in the pine cones. So it just sort of came together. Yes, the batik is more red wine. That's okay. Purple's a red. And So we're okay there. So anyway, the other is I tried what's called a flange. And if you can see right here, it's a folded piece of fabric set into the seam. So each seam, you just lay this folded piece of fabric in, and you have right sides together of everything. So this is sandwiched in between the green and the wine, or the and it adds, I don't know, I like it. I usually use it for a pop color arc, and I don't want too much of it. If I was to sew a 1/4 inch fabric showing, that'd be really bulky on the back. So sewing it as a folded piece of fabric allows me to deliver a color just to spark it up and pull that. So topic on front design. We've talked a lot about that. We're going to go back to a lot of these things later in the series. And but these are all things that came to me. I made 4 of this same block design, mixing the lights and darks. And so each one out really different. I mean, the receding colors and the moving forward colors, the stronger colors. When the burgundy and the bulk of the design, the border and the big triangles here, that really, it was just a real strong design. So they changed the whole look, and somewhere I have of all 4 of them, but this was made in 1994. No, this was made in 2004. Sorry. Okay, so the design. Then we have on the back. So the back, I'm really pleased to say, is one of my um, kind of showcase quilting designs. And so I was able to take these logos, remember, and do a more open design, and then tighten up some areas in the stippling. The quilting design gave me the form to stipple around. When you turn around here, and this is something I want you to think about when you're paying a arm quilter, is that if on the front your fabric is busy like this, that quilting doesn't show, folks. And if I'd have paid somebody else to do that specialized quilting, it would have cost. And while I could look at the back anytime and really admire it, it's not what's going to show. And so your fabric choice affects your quilting choice. This would have for hire been, but just had an all over quilting design. It didn't really give it that much. And so then we did quilting last time. So I have stippling here. The stippling came after I did the heart. And the way I did the heart, of course, I had the front side showing, is I made a mark in a chalk along in the middle, perpendicular to this line. So dividing this triangle in half. So it would show me when I came in to make this loop that I need lobe to stay on this side of that line and not cross over it. So it gave me enough space to aim for, and I have the long, so that makes it a lot easier for sure. And then likewise in a center design, I just divided it up with chalk marks, and then that gave me something to aim for. A free motion, it's all free motion, but gave me that space to fit things in. And then did the little loopy border is just an up and a down and an up and a down, and it just goes the way around. And this one is, I remember it being quite, like when I finished, I'm all quilt. Yes. It was pretty tricky, but I just marked I just did a chalk mark to keep it even, and then aimed for that spot. Loops, also.
So that's all free hand?
Yeah. No, I don't have a computerized machine. So quilting then is done. So then I trimmed it up. So I had my 3 layers, my top, batting, and back. And when it was quilted, the batting and back were slightly bigger than the top. Trim that all up so that they're all even. And then measure the perimeter. And what I do is I measure the perimeter. I use that number and divide it by 40, which is more than the width of fabric, or less than the width of fabric. And so divide it by 40, and that will tell me how many pieces of strips, how many strips I need to make my binding. So I bet this was like 3 strips. And so I cut my 3 strips. If it's out 2.17, you have to cut 3, because 2 plus a little more. And so you're going to have to cut into that third one. If it's 2.99, you're good with 3, because you've done division by 40. So you've given yourself a little room and you're fine. So that's why I use 40. That takes that in. Yeah, when you do it by 40, it takes in the cross section joining, and I'll demonstrate that or show you. And then sewing the binding. In putting the binding on, I cut my binding 2 1/4 inch wide. I don't like it excessive. And it doesn't look good over time. I have an old show you here. Yeah, that's a good one to show you later. But I don't like this. This binding is it's one of my better bindings. It's the right width of strip so that when it wraps around, full. The 1/4 inch seam, I do a generous 1/4 inch seam, and it's full. If you cut a 3-inch binding and wrap it around, it's either going to wrap all the way around to here, or it's going to be flat, extremely flat and wavy, because it doesn't have any firmness in it. So you want, and if you ever enter in a show to be judged, officially judged, never done that, but if that's something you want to aspire to and that gives you pleasure, then go for it, and all the techniques that make everything perfect. That's not my approach, and but I do aspire to have it look as close to that as I can without making myself miserable. So I like a binding when it's sewn by machine to the front, wrapped around to the back, and hand stitched. And so the hand stitch is just a blind stitch, whip stitch, where works for you. Yes, it is. And a very dear friend of mine told me once that I wasn't a hand sewer at all. It doesn't go fast enough. And said, no, you want to do that. You don't want somebody else to do that. That's your kiss goodbye. That's the last time you touch your quilt before you move it on to somebody else. So I've taken that heart, and I really do feel that way. When I'm doing that binding, it's that farewell. It's that final touch, leaving your mark. So quilting, binding, labels. Now labels can have this label. Amazing. This was printed on by a computer with an inkjet printer and printed onto the fabric. My friend actually made this for me, and she uses freezer paper, irons this fabric to the freezer paper, and runs that through her printer. So that the fabric side gets printed, obviously, and then peels the fabric off and treats the fabric as a piece in the quilt, just like you would anything else. You can do that with photographs. You can do it with printed, with anything. You can put it on a computer and print onto paper. You can do it on paper. But you want to use an inkjet because that's a permanent ink. So she did a very elaborate label and a lot of information about this card that was printed. And so the card on the front is printed the same way. So it was a greeting card that she printed. And so what was I going to say? So it can be elaborate or it can be ever so simple. And all I did in this is I used the quilt line, and where I had space that the writing would show, I simply used a fine tip permanent marker and wrote down the name of it is Manic Dendrites Color Play 2. And so if you have a name, we don't always name our quilts, so but it's by me, Suzanne Sterrett, and then where in Missoula, Montana, and the date, May 2004. And so, so the labeling, again, there's no rules, there's no police that come around and check. So I think that most quilt shows encourage name, location, date to be somehow affixed to the quilt. And they often say permanently on the quilt, because if someone can take it off easily, then it can be stolen and, you know, all that sort of thing if you're putting it in a show. But if you're using it for you, the argument is that if it sticks around a while and you're not here as long as the quilt is, if the label on it, it's a mystery quilt. I own mystery quilts and I find them quite appealing and interesting to make up a story. It's like being a novelist or someone designing the story. But if the label's on it, people can actually identify, oh, that was made by Aunt Suzanne or Grandma or whoever, you know, it was that did the quilt. If you have any little tidbits about the meaning of the fabric or why I made it, you know, made in commemoration of blah, 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 or a donation quilt, you know, is a good idea to put made for, like I'm on the board of NAMI Missoula and I make a quilt for them a couple of times a year now. And then those quilts are raffled. So that's nice to have on the label. So there are a lot of things that you can put on the label. You can handwrite it with an indelible fine tip mark. And I don't see it right here. I usually have it in my little toolbox. But just the fine tip ones. You can also get, they tend a little bit, they tend to spread. But there is one, I can't think of the name of it. But there is one that's for quilting and it doesn't bleed as much. So, so that's the label. The label can be put on a separate piece of fabric. You can see here this label was actually hand sewn applique to the back. So you can put anything you want on it and applique it, or you can do it right into the quilt. Unless it's all white, in which case I wouldn't, because it can bleed all white front too. And that would not be good. So, okay. Then you have, if it is an art quilt, if it is something to go on the wall, how am I going to hang it? I have several that I brought with me. This is called a sleeve or a pocket, and it's, what I do is it's 2 layers, and I sew it into the seam when I'm sewing binding on the front. So it's on the back of the quilt, and I'm sewing my binding on the front of the quilt, and it's and then but I might use pins here only because there's so many layers and things can shift. But I don't like using pins, and I actually don't usually. But I have been known to. So, but you might find that pinning it in place keeps it from shifting. When you do your binding, you just go through and do your binding, and your hand sewing of your binding, if you're hand sewing, is going to line up almost with your sewn line. So the sewn line is going to show there, and you're just going to go barely over that when you hand sew. And then this piece, that's your folded piece of fabric, it's 2 layers thick. You want to put the folded edge with a little bit of fluff. So you're going to take, I have some samples here to show ya. What was I going to use? I thought here. Okay. Now we'll just, here we go. Here we go. All right. Let's say this is going to be my sleeve. I've got a piece. So I'm going to, well, first I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to sew the edges. Oh, love a featherweight. Until the old Singer mechanism goes, what? Oh, there we go. Okay, if this is my width here, and this is a really deep pocket for such a tiny piece, but just to show you, I wouldn't need it that deep. I'd have it here, and I want to make sure it's shorter than the piece. So I'm going to trim some of this off. You can use a ruler and a rotary cutter to do that. Absolutely. But right here, I'm got more ease doing this. Fold it in half. For some reason, I don't know if it's my shoe or, there we go. Oh. Do some work on that. Okay. Okay, and right here where the fold edge and the seam come together, you want to just trim that off a little because it's bulky and you'll have kind of a lump. And you just turn it inside out. And you would press it. This is my handy dandy poker. Finger presser, everything stick. So say we press that. And if I were doing a regular binding, I would center this and see I've got a good inch. Can't tell that so much because of all this. There we go. Okay, there's that. Then I would sew my binding on the top and fold it over, and you'd have a stitching line here and hand stitch just past that stitching line. Then what I do is just raise it a teensy bit. See, I have a little pleat there now, and I pin a lot and hand sew. And then that leaves enough fluff so that when you put a stick in to hang it, you're not going to have a ridge on the front from it pulling to curve around. So if you're using a 2-inch round stick, then this pot needs to be enough for that to fit in. So you need to know what you're going to hang with, okay? So, and it may need to even be wider than this if you have a really big piece and a big rock. But that's a trick for pockets, is to make sure you don't put them flat and stitch. You want to give any pocket at least a little fluff, if not quite a bit. Another strategy, and that's a pocket that gets sewn into regular binding. Okay. Now we have this, and what my friend Jackie did here is she has two pockets with a space in between, and the space in between is really nice because hanging this, and a small piece is going to be only like on one nail or one hook, so the one hook goes to the rod right in the middle and doesn't pull extra pressure on the pocket to make it tuck in the front. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's another option. Another option is that when you are putting your bindings on, instead of the two pockets, set down two folded triangular corners from squares. So you have a square fabric, you have it pressed, you set that right to the fabric, you sew your binding on just like you would, and then when you come around, your binding wraps around, and this is under your binding, and your rod fits in across there and holds your two corners. So a lot of it's just about how big is your quilt, how heavy is your quilt, what is it on, are you hanging it across something that's going to hang outside of the quilt? It's part of the decoration, and so you'll have two nails. Obviously wouldn't work because there's no place for it to come out. But this would, because it's two pockets, but just for a rod to slide in. Okay. Now bindings, different bindings can be really fun to play with. So the other binding we just talked about, I cut mine 2 1/4 width. You sew your bindings together on a perpendicular join. So you put, this is wider than 2 1/4, sorry. But the way you join them is right sides together. You make sure that it is in fact perpendicular. It's not like that. So you're going to have perpendicular, and you're going to sew from this outside corner where it connects to that outside corner. If you find yourself going into the V, you've done it wrong. Take that out, it won't work, and go back and sew across. You go from the outside to the outside, and then you trim a 1/4 inch seam. I press mine open because a binding wraps and wraps and wraps. If you have a straight seam, that seam will be quite bulky. So the diagonal allows the bulk of it to spread out. Okay, this is a faux flange binding. So the flange that I showed you, the little folded fabric inside the quilt design, this goes on the edge of the binding. And when the wider strip, I like a 1 5/8 inch, and the narrower strip 1 3/8 inch. You sew them together. You do everything else the same. You measure the outside of your quilt. You cut your strips. You join your strips in diagonals, and then you sew the two really long strips together the full length. 1 3/8 and 1 5/8. Now this is the thing to embed if you're going to give this a try. I hope you do. Is that it's counterintuitive which piece is which. So your binding takes up the most visual space when you look at it. And then you have this skinny little strip of, just a little zinger. And so you would think that the flange is the skinny part. It's not. The flange is the 1 5/8. The bulk of your binding is the 1 3/8. And let me show you why. Because it ends up like that. So like a regular binding, you can start out, and there's a number of ways that you can do a join on a binding, and whatever way you usually do your join and then at the finish, you do it the very same way with a flange. You just have a little bulk where the seams are. But you can start your design. Oh, sorry. You start on the back. And you have your flange color, which looks like, but that looks like it's my binding. That's not right. I didn't want the red. But that's the part that's going to get hidden because it wraps around. And then it wraps around again. Okay, so you just have to embed in your mind that counterintuitive concept in terms of which way everything starts and finishes.
So basically, you're starting with a 2-inch fabric instead of 2.
Let me measure just to be sure, but I think you're right. No, it's 2.5. Yeah, it comes out 2.5. And this is, let me make sure I told you right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because you have a 1/4-inch seam that gets taken up. But then you keep the other side up too, so you were just figuring for that. Yep. Okay. So now you fold it in half. I don't press here. Now I do press. So this is actually pressed to the binding piece. So to the skinny one. So the seam is pressed toward the skinny. Then fold it in half with just that little sliver. And like I said, I don't press in that position. I don't press my bindings either until they're all done, and even then I don't usually press them. But the reason is that for every time you fold fabric, like for a seam, for example, in a seam allowance and you press open your seams, there's a hair of fabric that gets wrapped in that disc of the actual fold. And so, so if you press it flat like this and it folds, your seam is now pushing more bulk. Where you've pressed, it's pushing more bulk inside the binding. So if you don't press, you allow the fabric to fall into place and to be as flat and unbunched up as possible. Okay? So on the back, I've got the wrong end here. On the back, here we go. Start here. And I do a folded tuck on my bindings. So I'm going to go like this. And this. And that's going to be my start. I'm going to hope my machine being a goofball here. And everything you do at this point is going to be like a regular binding. So I'm going to go around to the corner again, remind yourself, yes, the red is what I want to see. That's not wrong. And I'm going to sew down to 1/4 inch from the edge here. Turn it, sew off on the corner, fold up, fold down, and now I have my mitered binding. And that's going to look just lovely on the other side. And with this little tiny, and I hope I'm purposefully chose fabrics that showed. So if you're going red and turquoise polka dots, well, that's interesting. So sorry about, I guess I could have been a little more. Okay.
So in other words, we don't want to take colors.
Not use this as a model for color choices. Although it's not bad. It's kind of wild. It's kind of fun. It could be a very fun quilt with a bunch of other fabrics, I would say. Again, I'm not pressing that all the way in that double, in that one fold. Around. Yeah, please. And I didn't measure to make sure my seams, and of course, Murphy's Law, my seams are ending up dang near on my corner. Okay, so what I do is I eyeball a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to go one more, yep, and go right off the actual corner of the fabric. So here's the corner of the, and I can see it right here. You probably can't see it, sorry.
When you say the corner, you mean the actual, this corner right here?
Yes. Inch from the edge I'm sewing toward, and then I go 45 degrees right off to the corner. Now, a little tip here, it's when you start again after you've done this little, what I call a tent pleat, as you bring your fabric in, see how the thread here goes all, if you pull it out a little more and it off to the side, it's less likely to get all balled up.
Okay, no, I write that. How do you write that?
Get your thread out of the way. How about that? Get your thread out of the way. And then sew right over the hump of the fold. And what that does is it holds the miter in place so that when you wrap it around, it doesn't come in the corner. So, and to do this slow motion, so here's, I sewed off the corner of the actual fabric, the quilted piece, and I follow this 40 degrees, flipping this up, boom. So I have that 45-degree line there. Then I come right down to the top and fold straight down here. Okay, so it's flip, flip. And then get your thread out of the way, or don't, and get a booger underneath. Either way. And then this is my little tuck method I've demonstrated here before. What I do is, so I've folded this in a little tent here, and my sewing right at the fold, right where it crosses over. Can you see that? Okay. Then as I'm getting down here, I cut parallel to this edge here. I trim this off, and I trim it off so that it's going to it's gonna not run in stitching. Okay, so it's a little shorter than the actual stitching start. Does that show okay? We see that. Okay. Now, if you have a great big quilt, you're going to be moving your hand a little differently, but underneath you can see the point of the fold here, and I pull that out just a teeny bit. Can you see that? Just a teeny bit. Yeah, because that is a bias edge and it'll stretch. So when you have this tucked in and that bias edge is there and you fold it over, it'll like spread out and it'll blob. So if you pull that point just a little, just an eighth to a quarter of an inch down, then that fold is just a little snug. Okay? So now, come here. I'm going to grab this and that point underneath, I'm going to pull it out and over. So I'm pulling it up and over a little. And then my sewing line, I want to line right up with where I started. Boom. Okay, I'll let you pass that around and see.
Now, when you started, you made that little tent. How did you fold that again? I mean,
I'll show you. So, okay, fold it in half. All right, and this is the start.
Right.
All right, you fold it down.
Okay.
And then get this all tucked back. Actually, open it up. It's better. Fold it into a half square triangle at the end. Basically, take this point and fold it over to the other point. And then you start your sewing above the fold so that you're tacking it down. You want to tack the fold down because as you're coming up against it, coming around the next time, you lift it up on more layers and it'll push against that fold. If you haven't sewn over it, it'll want to get caught on your foot and kind of wiggle open. And then I'll show you, you just tuck that in. Into the, it's the camper.
Somebody asked Suzanne, which foot presser are you using?
You know, this is a featherweight, and I just use my regular foot. You can use a walking foot, and actually, if you have a walking foot on your machine for binding, it's a good idea. You have a lot of layers you're sewing on, and even and keeps them from being pulled. Another tip about binding, thank you for that comment, because it also reminds me that with binding, quilt is quilted, so it's kind of already puckered in, and your binding hasn't had anything done to it, so it's nice and flat. And so when you're just laying your binding on top of your quilt, it's already than the quilt is. So if you have a tendency to pull your top fabric as you sew, when you finish your binding, it's going to make a parachute. It's going to tighten and your quilt will actually bubble up with the binding so tight on the outside. So if your bindings are tight and your quilts have a tendency, especially like a wall hanging, something smaller, it will show. You'll hang it on the wall and it'll like pooch out. And or it'll go the other way. It'll make a bowl. So that means you're pulling your binding. So when you do your binding, you don't want to get it loose, and you want to realize that as your quilt's washed, the quilt itself is pucker more. It's had all that stitching and it's pulled everything together. So you have to find the right tension to have on your binding as you're going around. So now this is the tent that I started with. This is the end that I cut parallel to the opening of the tent. And I'm going to tuck that in to the tent. Little camper, go to sleep. And I'm just using these scissors to poke it and get her in there. So now I'm going to use the scissors to wiggle it flat so that this seam on top, I'm not feeling underneath a bunching of this piece. Okay, so now it's all there. And I might have to pull and tug a little bit to line those up. But at that joining, it might be a teensy bit off. If you want to, you can sew that diagonal seam. There's a lot of instruction videos, and I'd be glad to, for those of you local, I'd be glad to show you that sometime. But when I go back, if I'm going to I might hand sew that little section, just even put one tack in right there at the seam just to hold it in place. Yes. And so now this is the really cool thing about a flange binding. So this is what happens on your miters on the back by doing that sewing off the corner, is that it wraps right down nice and 45 degrees. Oh, you get a seam right there. No. I every once in a while I do, if I notice for some reason I didn't quilt squarely and there's just a little bit more of a point or something. But keeping that bulk in there actually keeps your corner square, because when that bulk's removed, there's nothing in the shape. Okay, so now the hardest spot is this right here. So I will I will pin. Oh, I hate pinning. You know I hate pinning. You heard me. You hate pinning. Yeah.
So I thought that's why I'm so addicted to pinning.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when I quilt, I don't necessarily, but that's.
So, and what you'll have to do as you get your, I know I have a pin somewhere. In here. If I don't, I don't. Okay, I'll hold it in place. So I'm just gonna hold this right here. Now, as you try to get that nice alignment, you may have to slide it, stretch it, kind of play with it to get the right spot. And then use something pointy. A pin would do it, but I'm not gonna. That's enough just to hold it in place. Now I'm not using a thread to hide the thread because I want you to see the stitching. So I apologize about that. Now right in here, see how it just kind of bubbles? You just keep tucking that in. Just keep shoving it in there, like putting on tight jeans. And not liking this, sorry, but it'll just have to be okay. Now, in the ditch, yeah, no, and then it's just amazing. You get this sweet little mitered corner here, right with, I don't know if that's visible, can you see that okay? So you get a little mitered corner right on the end, and
the red and the orange next to each other.
well, and all right, I'm only just gonna go this far, and I'm gonna use my stitcher as a great stiletto, and you can pull and tuck and get that corner so it lines up just as can be. Don't run into your stitch ripper. That would not be good. But I would use red thread and try and get right in the ditch. Now on my other machine, I have a what do I have? Janome. And I have an in the ditch foot that, so I'm just gonna show you here how that looks. So it goes right around and you get that flange, and you can see my white stitching. If that were red, it'd be virtually invisible. And then on, it's going to be just beyond the line of sewing here. So you'd want your bobbin thread to match your back of your quilt or pot holder or whatever you're doing. It's not bigger the piece, but on a bigger piece than this little demo piece, it's actually easier to get everything to work. But on the tinier something is, the harder. So I just love it. So if you want to take a peek and see, and then you just go all the way around, and that's it. Art quilts. Art quilts are fun. You have some facing bindings, and what you do here. Oh, there it is. It's like, where's the So I have my, thank goodness I have all this old lovely ducks to demonstrate. They're kind of fun actually, but kind of key. And a little reminder about Frankenstein batting. When you have leftover batting pieces, don't toss them in the garbage, because you can just do a nice wide zigzag and long zigzag and butt them right up, so right over the butt, and you've got batting. It doesn't work on polyester to do that, because polyester has a fluff in it, and when you stitch it packs it down. But do it with polyester by just taking a needle and thread and doing a super humongous running stitch. Just whip stitch, just do that and kind of tacks it, holds it together. There's another method that some people use of strips of fusible and pressing that on top of the two pieces but together. I just would rather sew it personally. I think it's less toxic stuff and less, I don't know. I'd rather. Yeah, it could get stiffer. I just think the less you add of iron-on stuff, the better. But that's me. That's what I'm talking about. Be true to yourself. Okay, so facing is interesting. And I always have to get my brain around it. All right, let's say we're going to do these little, let's say these are going to be wall hangings. They're so beautiful. Anyway, and we're going to put those right on the corners. I've already cut nice and square. That's important. And then I have this reused piece of fabric that is, okay, and I'm going to put it here. Now notice this is a raw edge. That's okay. Raw edge. That's okay. And sorry, I just noticed this actually is in good shape, but I had a finger pressing, getting it flat here. There we go. And then got one that is the length. Goes on the bottom. And one that is longer than the side. And go together, it'll make sense to you. This doesn't really matter. It just has to be beyond the pocket, because this is going to be hidden by the pocket, and you don't want a lot of bulk up in that corner. Okay. Remember, nope, this goes on top. Okay, this goes on top because everything touching the quilt is going to be the last layer to wrap around. All right, the last layer. One might pin them together. Yes. Okay. And you can. I don't use anything. I yeah. You know, I don't mind.
The stress level right now I'm having is
Okay. So here we go. And you start in, you go all the way around, 1/4 inch. This is where walking foot is quite nice, speaking to that question. And when you get to the corner, you go, let me think, 1/4. You want to stop short of the inch. So you give yourself a little extra room. Turn, this is old sewing garments, and do 1 or 2 stitches. I think I did 2. And then you come this way, be right about at a 1/4 inch here. And oops. Oh, tuck those in, hold it down here. There. Oops, I got my stitch length a little off here. I just love my featherweight. It's so nice. Okay, so I'm gonna give myself more than the 1/4 inch. Turn diagonal, stitch 1, 2. Turn again. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm just gonna stop here because it'll show the 2 corners I'm working on to show you. Okay, trim that off. Now this you do cut those corners. So you trim pretty close to those little stitches that you took at an angle. A little close here. Okay, so we're going to toss. And then this will turn around. And this, so the underside is the longer piece. And it is now like so. And then use, I have another stiletto. I don't know what it is. I have one at home. And I'm gonna, doing that angled 1 or 2 stitches with batting 2, I think is essential, but 1 will help. This gives a little space for everything to come together. And then here is what you get. You get that longer piece is tucked in on the bottom when that's sewn. This piece is tucked underneath. The raw edge doesn't show because it's underneath there. And then you have a clean edge of an art piece that you don't want a binding to. Okay? And you have these lovely hanging pockets. So you have one on this side, you have one on this side, and your stick goes in there. So you don't hand stitch down that triangle. You don't want to do that. But you do hand stitch down the facing. So it's to use sewing garments term. This is a facing binding. So you can see that seam edge is right there. So you don't want a color that's gonna, be harsh if it's a little bit, but you can press it and manipulate it and get it to roll back and really be invisible. It's also a way to finish just with these corners, all four corners like this. It's also a way to do a table runner, and that you don't want a binding on this finished piece you've just done. But the binding will wrap around and become a lovely border. However wide you want it to be, will be a nice border on the back fabric. So you have, it really gives you a lot of cool options thinking about this faced piece. This, oh no, it's 3 at least. Yeah, because if you think about it, it's folded in half, so you have 1/2 inch eaten up in your seam because it's folded in half, so quarter. And so you've already narrowed it down to 1 1/4. Is that right? Yeah. So if you want it, it depends how wide you want it on the back. And how big your art piece is. If you have a big art piece and you make a wider facing, it lays better. Yeah. Yeah, it stabilizes it. Yep. So then this is blind stitched down. You just pull this back to get up in the corner and then go around, and then you have the 2 pockets for a stick that you want to hang it on. Another method for hanging is this. And then this also brings about different options on backs. So backs, it's interesting. If you're not, I really would encourage you to be part of some of the Facebook groups. I know Facebook has its thing, yeah. But I don't click on the advertising stuff. I just chat with the people. But someone had a back, and it was a brick like this that they were using, and they needed to piece it right down the middle. Hold that thought. I have a comment later about that. But so she pieced it down the middle, and where it joined all the way down, she just didn't like the look of this distinct seam. So she put a little strip of black to just do a sashing kind of on the 2 sides. And she wasn't real thrilled with that. And so, what do you do with bindings? And I thought, well, I don't care that much, I guess, is one. But the other is that this seal is a mistake. A seam down the middle, where do you fold a quilt? You fold it in the middle. The seam has a bump. It's going to get worn. And fold it in the middle with a bump edge, going to wear that spot faster than any other spot on the quilt. So it's always good to have your seams off center for function, not for looks. I don't think of the back of a quilt as another quilt. I don't think of the back of the quilt as anything but the back of a quilt. But I see it when I fluff my quilt up and I get inside it, or I wrap myself in it. And so I do want it to be pretty. I want it to have fun. But I see it as a functional use of fabric that you have left over. You're not going to use any other place. I see it as a way to play. So if you have leftover blocks, do some fun design work on the back of your quilt. But don't worry about, is it even? Is it the right length? Is it whatever? Just play and have fun. So this quilt was done in 1990, very early days of quilting. And I designed it and I fit and I got the ankles right, and I'm so glad. But this was for a friend of mine who passed away recently, and you can see that this braiding border that I did on the sides, I had leftovers, and so I used them on the back. So the back is a place to use over fabrics. Also, not Maybe not my most stellar choice of fabrics, but it was my granddaughter picked the unicorns, and well, okay. So this is the quilt, and this is for Quilts for Kids. And so the quilt was all pieces from a planned wall hanging of unicorns and rainbows and stuff. And then this was just all leftovers. So I made the quilt, and it actually block to it. It has, here I can see it down here. It has this block. So they're not all the same though, but most of them have one piece and then some variation of these sizes that go around it. So it does have that. And there's the quilt. Well, when I made the initial wall hanging in about 36 inches, and I had put this and these two sides together for the back, and then when I got around to quilting it, I forgot that I made that back, and so I quilted it with a different back, and then went, oh, I have that back. Well, so I had to make it for this quilt, so I found these fabrics down on this end here, on my right, your left. And so the back is just whatever I had left over and pulled together in some design. It does. It does. It's fun. Yeah.
So how do they preserve quilts away?
Yep. Yep. And so I have their logo label on here.
So do they draw? Do they just
No, various organizations contact Quilts for Kids and say we need 6 quilts for babies, 6 quilts for little kids. Isn't it fun? Yeah. I'm very happy with it. Came out fun. So and okay, so that's that. Now I want to show you I think it's just a super fun way to do a back that you need a little bit bigger. So we know the back is 42 inches or 41, probably usable space. And invariably, a quilt pattern will end up making, say, a nice square baby quilt that is, say, 43 inches. Oh, darn. And if you put the extra 2.5 inches along one side and one edge, one top or bottom, it will, if you are quilting it, those seams have a different tension than the open big piece. And it is more likely to pucker, more likely for a long arm quilter to have uneven tension on the back because the seams are tighter. A friend of mine, a very dear quilting friend of mine, taught me this method, and I love it. It ends up making a back that is so cool. So what you do, I have my piece that is, well, I'm just going to open it up here. Okay, so this was what I had. I know the selvage to selvage was the 40 whatevers, but it wasn't wide enough, but not by far off. Okay, let's even say it was 46 I needed it to be. And so it's not going to make it. So what I had enough length to get 46, or maybe not quite. I don't know. Yeah, the scenarios can be many. And but what you're doing, let me open it up first. So if you make one strip, you've increased this direction by that amount, right? Well, when you go diagonally, you have increased both directions. So this strip is 8.5, so 8. So you're going to add 8. But guess what it adds here? 11. So when you put diagonal piece, you are increasing this and this. Now, depending on where you start it, you can increase side to side more than up and down or the other way around. And I'll show you what I mean by that. That's probably a confusing statement. The thing is if you have a rectangle, it's not going to be a 45-degree angle, but you are going to find corner, opposite corner, and you're going to fold. And if you have a nice big table like this or a big floor, that's best because this has already been folded, so it's behaving quite nicely. Because this fold here is going to get twisty and turny, and you're going to have to kind of, you know, get stuff even and flatten it out. So you flatten it out. Scissors, but I'm going to use their scissors here. You have a nice strong, I didn't bring my big ones. And you start at this corner, and you just do the old style cutting fabric with scissors. I'm not being careful at all, as you can tell. It's not going to be a perfect, nice, straight seam or edge. Lovely helper here. Thank you, Pat. And we'll just put it there. Okay. Then I'm going to measure there to there. And I'm going to say, how wide do I want it to be to get my necessary distance? And how much fabric do I have to get the necessary distance? And so I had this piece and this piece. Now here's a cool little thing. I can now take that label for Quilts for Kids or whatever label I've made and sew it onto here real easily. I'm not putting it on a huge back or something. I can also put a brick that I can write on, so that's my label. So that's another option for doing it this way. And I'm going to set this down. I'm going to do that little corner thing and give myself plenty because I don't know where I'm going to need to go. And I sew with the straight edge, not the bias cut edge, on top. So the straight piece is on top. I'm just going to come to my sewing machine. You want to not manage it, over manage. You don't want to handle it a lot because it is a bias edge and it'll stretch out of shape. Well, it won't. No one's going to die. You know, I often talk about that, and you know, I worked in human service for many, many years and was a therapist, and there are a lot of big problems that people face. This isn't one. so let it go, figure it out. And as I really do sew a lot like this at home, I'm very impulsive. I'm very, I don't use pins. I just kind of, oh, this will work. Let's go. And that helps get the needle up where I can see it. Oops, do my little trick. Flick the needle, remember.
And why does that work? Because it really does.
It does. When you lick the needle, say lick, but you put a bunch of spit on it. I just can't see today, I'm sorry. I don't know where I am. There we go. Molecules have a certain amount of electronic energy holding them together. So water has, and spit's mostly water, a certain amount of what's called surface tension. So those molecules stay together. When they fit into the eye of the needle, they have that surface tension, and the thread, which is a fiber, pokes it, and it's actually pulled in. So when you spit on your eye of your needle, and I do just spit a little bit on my thread, but you don't want to get your thread real wet because that actually then you have, oops, I didn't sew any of that. I was practicing, as my friend Melody says. Oh, there we go. And now I have my thread all wrapped around my foot. Get out of there.
And none of these things
Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. Well, that too, but Okay, so this will take a bit because, so chat amongst yourselves. No.
I want to know where you got the
I am so glad you want to know, but gosh, I just gave away 2 cedar chests of wool that had on them that said 1991, 1973. So no, I don't know. That it is more recent. I remember getting it. Um, oh, oh, cute. Oh, cute. You know, amazing minkies now with cute prints, and the minky is so soft. I love a flannel backed quilt. I really do. It's my fave. And if I have that option, I get a flannel. My Janome goes really fast. I like it. So you might be able to see that I am making sure none of this fabric's getting pulled too tight, that I'm keeping a fair amount of ease, fluff fabric as I sew.
And it is puckering. Oftentimes I look pretty.
Yeah.
But then with that, you have to do the side on the bottom. So that
It,
is where the tension is.
yeah, I also think that they're just, the more you do, the more your brain, sewing is a sensory experience for me. It is. It's huge, and my body tells me that I'm doing it right or not. The pressure against the fabric on my hands are touching it. The feel of this part right here, the muscular tension in my shoulders, all of that. So, you know, I love sewing. I love your hobbies so that they are part of you, that not just that you do them, but that you are them. Kind of lofty, sorry. But, and the very last bits are a little tricky. The top and the bottom point are, it's harder to see exactly where you are on things. And you got them. Okay, now, so here is that. All right, now I'm gonna lay this out. And oh, and look at that, I did it right. While I was making this, I thought, oh, are my bears directional? And then they're not. Okay, well, then it didn't matter. But I thought they were. And I got my dogs this way and my bears that way. But then there's these guys that aren't. So okay, that's good too. I can't, Kings, always, always, always trim your selvages off. They're not good to have in seams. They're extra. They change the body of the quilt. The feel of it. They change all kinds of things. Okay, so I've got my dogs going in the right direction. So this is in fact the right direction. I don't want to accidentally start here or do something weird. And I'm going to set that down here. Thank you. And this here. I don't know if I need to move it like that. How's that? Yeah. Okay. So, this here. Okay, and this is the eyeball peep part. Now, this is, I cut corner to corner. I need more that length for my quilt, then I can do this. See how it's not truly the same alignment it was where I cut it? Did that make sense? And if I need more width, then I can do this. And then I have, as long as this point well, I don't have enough fabric there, but I'll show you what I've done in the past, is I'll take a chunk from there, sew it onto here, and then be able to cut that. So if you have, this is really fun. I love geometry. I love it's a puzzle. And to me, it's very, very fun to go, oh, whoops, okay, let's see, what do I need to do there? So, you know, be present with it in a way that says, by George, I think I've got it. And if you do, woohoo. If you don't, shift it, go back. It's okay. There isn't anything in this process that is like you ruined your day, you know?
My instinct would be to match the corner to corner of the two fabrics you cut apart.
Right,
That's what I would
right, exactly. And that can work. That can work too. So you can look at it getting
but then it,
either like here's this corner and there's that corner. That's how it was originally. That's the fabric. Well, it was like right there. Okay. But
it's matching.
well, and it doesn't, it might be that's the size you need. So it might be that you need that. That's going to give you the most in this direction, because from that point, actually, no, I'm sorry. That's going to give you the most even distribution in both directions, because you're just straight off the diagonal putting this slide in. But if you needed it more that size, you needed more length, you can come, well, you can't come all the way down to there. What you do is you get your square. So yeah, I just had that out. Here it is. You get your square and you follow that down to the bottom of your fabric, this piece down here, and that's where you're gonna put that on. Okay, so that gave me the most length in this direction that I could add. Still did give me some width too, because of the diagonal. You get both no matter what, but you can shift it to get the best fit for you. So whatever it is you need in the quilt you're making. Okay, and then you have this diagonal piece on the finished back. If it gets pinned to a long arm machine, it might be that they finish and this is bigger and it gets cut here, and that's okay. That diagonal strip isn't trying to be centered. It can be off. It can be at the top end. It can be at the bottom end. It can be anywhere. And it's still change. Now, this color option may not please you. Think about if you had a red, or if you had a black and white dot or something that was that strip in the middle. Then you've designed your back of your quilt with as much interest really as the front. So it's a really, really fun way. It's tricky, no doubt. Once you've done it really just a couple times, you've figured out the tricks to it. And it's a very fun way, even if you have the right amount of fabric, it's a fun way to spark up the back with a narrow strip. You don't have to do a big wide swath like that. So I'm not going to sew this on because I don't know what it's going to go to, and I don't want to make it unusable like I just did on the unicorn quilt. But so that's that. How are we on time? Oh gosh, okay. Well then, doggone. Always go for I expect. So that's Liberated Quilting, by golly. Hey. And I guess I just want to share real quickly that I'm in the middle of making a quilt. This is that spontaneity I love about quilting and me, but it's also kind of a nuisance, is that I saw a picture on Pinterest and went, well, that's easy. and then went about just making it on the fly. And I had a bunch of rail fence blocks. Well, that's good. So I'll just show you real quickly here. This is the interior of it. I have to decide what the heck I'm gonna do as I move out. Have fun doing these. These were like it didn't measure out great, but it's okay. It worked. It's a little wonky, but pull it back in with that outer border.
Now, what would you do for the back? I mean, the fabric ring, not that particular one. Would you go completely, totally different color wise?
Mostly the fabric I have on hand dictate that.
Yeah.
But I would do any or all of those.
I know sometimes your back is totally different.
Totally. Glad to see you. Yeah.